to Elaine and your team the best of luck. The first thing I think we should, in the agricultural sector and indeed rural Ireland, speak very openly about is that there's a crazy gang at the moment talking about one-off housing and that it's not sustainable. The first thing is that if you build a house out in the countryside, you don't have a footpath abroad on the road put in for you by the council. You don't have street lighting. You have to pay for your own water. Like, we have the roads are there, like, geez, as bad as it is, they're hardly going to get rid of the roads, do you know what I mean? So the roads have cost what they have cost up to now, so they're not making more new roads anywhere. DSB has come around Ireland, thankfully, and hopefully the broadband over the coming years will be around. So the infrastructural cost to a state is no more. It's only a maintenance actually on the road. So this thing about this myth that's going on of the unsustainability of rural one-off housing needs to be put to bed fairly quick, because obviously the people that's talking about it don't understand what the main sewer and the treatment plants and pumping water from the countryside up to keep them, the thirst off them has cost. So I think that needs to be the first thing. In fairness now, I think that for anybody, regardless whether you're young or old, the initiative by the government in the 70,000 or the 50,000 is it's okay. You know, I'd be happy with it. But the one thing that we are getting blocked at, and it's a huge problem, is the second part of that money that you need from the banking sector. At the moment, and I'll give you an example near me, and I'm going to name them Bank of Ireland, because I think it needs to come out in the open. The inconsistency in banks, where there's a person trying to buy a house, and this is happening around the country, and they want a home bond. Now, them houses might be built in 2010 and 11 and finished off now, so there's no home bond. And AIB will accept and do a mortgage without this home bond, but Bank of Ireland won't. And this is the inconsistencies for young people trying to get on. The second inconsistency is on the planning. I see in Roscommon during the week where an extension to a dwelling out the back, a living room and because it wouldn't coincide with the landscape. Now there's cows each side of the field of that house, there's land each side, and whatever the planners believe about landscape, this is what's going on of the inconsistencies in counties. And I think that message has to come from government, that we are in a housing crisis. And if someone is willing to do up an older house and put a bit of an extension on out the back to make it livable. The third thing I think, and it's one thing I would advise people, because you learn as you go along, like everyone believes that they nearly need a 3,000 square foot house now. And when they're 20 or when they're 50 or 60, when they're getting to my age, you'll be wondering who'll be staying in it, because they'll be gone from you. The birds fly from the nest, to be quite frank about it. And we should be looking at, you know, you'll build a reasonable sized tidy house still at fairly all right of money. The fourth thing is that we need a cast iron guarantee that on roads, what I call national routes, or you'll see these routes where NRA or TII is involved. And a youngster wants to build a house besides their parents, and maybe they'd swap over, that they might build a 2-bedroom that their parents would go into and they might have a bit. And they're prepared to come out a shared driveway, which was always the rule going down the years of being able to come out on them roads because they were a TII road. But dammy at the moment, some genius in TII, the minute you put in for planning is now objecting. Now government will have to make and get involved there, because that's blocking an awful lot of stuff, be it someone downsizing a smaller house and the parents go over there and they go into the other house or whatever. And I think that if the other thing I'd like your opinion on, like, there's 100,000 houses and holiday homes in this country. Now, they're there and I don't think we can take them off anyone, so they're going to be there. What's your view, or what do we do with them, or do we just leave them alone because they're there? The fifth thing I want to talk about is under the derelict properties. If there's a sort of a shack of a house that the walls aren't good in, and if someone is prepared to belt down most of the walls and rebuild it, up to now it's very hazy. It's the definition of a council or the person that comes out that if you don't leave some parts of the walls, well then you don't get the grant. So that needs clearance, that if you even had to take every bit of wood out, that you knock a wall and build a wall back. And the other thing that needs tidying up as well, that's a damnable situation, is there's people that register their septic tanks, that there might be problems with them now. And until you get the 5%, if you're lucky enough that it's like the lotto, that they'll come to you this year, you'll get the grant if you have to do it up. But if you're not lucky enough, well, it might be still heading off into the stream. You know, that's the reality. And I think that if we change them, but the big fundamental point, and a lot of you have touched on it earlier, is the gap. And in fairness, I think there may be an avenue with some councils, but the paperwork is horrendous in getting funding or getting a loan. But there needs to be some, and they're not looking for free money. Let's be very clear on that. That they're looking for, you know, that the likes of something to be state-backed, no more than there was a few state-backed loans for farmers that would help them to fill that gap, because unfortunately it's all about figures now with banks. It's all about income and expenditure and all this crack, and it's not functioning. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that, and thanks to the lot of you.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Deputy Fitzmaurice. And I might hit off one or 2 points before passing on to Alistair. Listen, Deputy, you make some very valid points, and I suppose it can be summed up in one word: inconsistency, whether it's the banking sector or the county councils. And I would say, looking in terms of county councils, there's some major inconsistencies. And again, I'll go back to an issue we came above in Kildare when I was chairman. And we had someone like that who was looking for planning permission to build on family land. They were coming home and they wanted to come out on the existing driveway to get onto the main road, and they refused planning on that basis. They then resubmitted their planning and put in a new entrance onto the main road, and they were refused planning again because of line of sight. And that's what people are faced with. And that person went through an awful time trying to get planning and working it out, and bent over backwards for the council. But that's a major inconsistency which made no sense. So it's because words on a paper were interpreted a certain way. One of the other major inconsistencies that you actually didn't mention was the issue of development levies. And you see it when like on border counties. So again,
in fairness, if you're taking over a farm, there is, I've known a good few councils where you can get them.
You can appeal them down, but if you look at, let's say, in counties, I know Wicklow is very high, Meath is very high, and Kildare is very high. But where I am, for example, on the Kildare-Offaly border, the Kildare development levy is 4 times the Offaly levy.
But if you're taking over a farm, is there an allowance?
Yeah, I'm not sure. You can win and you can appeal it down. You can definitely appeal it down.
Is there not?
No, but that's a huge inconsistency. And furthermore,
get your councillors to vote it in. You have enough of them.
If you're applying for finance, you're obviously your mortgage in this, and a big chunk of your mortgage is to pay a development levy, where you already have you're already sinking your own well, already have your own septic tank, and you're like what you said, Deputy, you're on no street lights. It's very hard to see where the value for money you're getting nowadays. So it's something that sticks in the craw of a lot of people who are looking to build on family land. Thanks.
Deputy Fitzmaurice, just on a couple of points there. I personally have had experience where my daughter applied for planning permission on the farm, and she will be taking over the farm, but she had to pay. She hasn't built the house yet. She decided to buy rather than build, even though we've given her a site, because the levies were over €3,000. for lighting, for street lighting, for septic tank, or for storage, I should say, and for water connection. And the nearest one to us is probably about 7 kilometres away. And we're told the sooner that they will have room to build houses in that village will be in 7 years' time. So she wisely decided, I'll hold on to the site, Daddy, and I will for 5 years and hope I might do something, but I'll buy a house in the meantime where I can get all of those things. But I live in a county where we have a huge amount of holiday homes, and just to address your point on that, in Wexford. And trying to get those houses used for accommodation would be absolutely impossible. Most people who own those use them for 3 months of the year, but they're not open to having them used for anything else during the rest of the year. So I can't see that, unfortunately, being any way of freeing up houses. They see it as their private property, their right to their holiday time and whatever.
Can I just come in on one thing for you all on housing? And I think there's one thing in the cupboard that's not being talked about. This is thrown out constantly, that there's, especially for older people, that you can get this warmer homes crack. If you have a stone house, a land commission house, which was, a lot of them in the west of Ireland, and indeed right around the country, there'll be a lot of land commission houses that was built. A lot of them are a story and a half or a story and 3/4. They wouldn't be the full height of the thing. But when you get the guy who comes out, if you have stone in the walls, they're very reluctant to do anything with the house. And like they're talking about, we're hearing about A1 rating and B rating and all the ratings in the world. But a lot of these people they haven't the gear to actually resolve this issue, because they're talking about sweating in stone.
Yeah. Just to finish on that point, I think you're absolutely right, but it's inconsistencies everywhere. It's inconsistency in planning. In different counties, it takes forever to get planning permission to do the simplest thing you mentioned about your own, an extension, there's somebody there, and you can apply and cost, and it costs every time that you go back to do that, because you're changing plans or whatever, and you have to go to your architect and pay to have that done. So it becomes very costly. There's inconsistency in how the different councils will approach what you're doing, whether they like and it depends on the planner. In our county, it depends which planner you go for. You try to find which one of the planners is going to be taking your case when you apply for planning permission, because some of them will be a little bit more lenient, particularly if you're in the rural areas. They're a little more lenient. Others just have notions in their head and they don't make 1 ounce of sense. And the other thing I think I would absolutely agree with you on is that there are a number of houses, and Mr. Speaker, you mentioned earlier that there are a number of houses, one-off housings, that do not belong to farms, and many of those are in parts of Ireland where the bloodline has died out, and those houses are there. And I think there may be a fair bit of bureaucracy in trying to find out the folio for those and who owns them, and going back far enough to get it registered into somebody's name, because in many cases many of those houses have gone through a couple of generations now, and to get them registered on a folio can be quite difficult.
Yep, thank you, Deputy Fitzmaurice, for your question and or your comments, and to go through them. Certainly, the one-off rural dweller, whether it's a new house or indeed a revamp, the service charges for footpaths, street lighting, hugely frustrating for a younger, indeed middle-aged or a not so young person. You mentioned home bond and being an issue, and it certainly is for people that are buying houses that were partially complete earlier. A number of inconsistencies. You talked about the extension out the back in various different counties. They're looked upon in various different ways. The same way with the TII roads, the derelict house, and I suppose the challenge, what the council interpretation is of retaining a wall, and there can be even health and safety issues with retaining that wall, as well as energy rating issues as we move forward. Obviously, you alluded to the fact that there was 5% of inspections on septic tanks, and where there was a problem, in order to draw down the grant aid, I suppose we need to be very sure on that one, that we don't overburden the people that are building, because go back to the point, the availability of finance, the feasibility of finance, and I suppose that very bridging gap while somebody will be waiting for the 70,000 euros grant. I know in the drawdown of a mortgage there are 4 different drawdown periods, and maybe 5 for some financial institutions. And I think it would help the builders if the grant aid was drawn down in 4 or 5 tranches as well, so that you wouldn't be waiting until the very end for all your grant aid. Thank you.
Mr. Punge.
I suppose the one thing that concerns me, inconsistency is a problem, but I'd be a bit nervous that inconsistency would be solved by going to the worst possible level of consistency. And you know, and I don't say that lightly, because as you say, there's a lot of ideology coming into this around one-off houses, and indeed around aesthetics and around, you know, energy ratings, a whole list of things here which fundamentally are going to act as a barrier to progress, being blunt about it. We need to have a reasonable, pragmatic approach to what is needed. And people, at the end of the day, need a home at a reasonably affordable cost. In terms of, and you mentioned, and I think it's pertinent to this, about people as they go older living in a house that's too big. It's actually very relevant to this discussion, because I'm aware it reminds me of a family at the moment where there's a family of 4 living in a rented house, but the farmhouse at home is being used by the remaining parent, and they're now renovating a farm building, essentially an old stone building outside, for the mother. And there's a lot of potential here to have good succession plans, because when we talk about family farms and succession, one of the issues is that the farm won't provide enough income for 2 houses. And part of that, of course, is linked, the cost of living is really about the cost of the younger family and how they pay the mortgage. And in some cases, they might end up building a new house or renting or buying a house in the nearest town, perhaps. And the solution is there in front of you for the younger family with the kids to move into the old farmhouse, and for the parents maybe to downsize into what could be a renovated shed or building on the farm. So there's a lot of potential here for practical solutions, but the barrier is potentially bureaucracy, ideology, and planning officials who have a can't do rather than can do attitude.
Ms. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Deputy Fitzmaurice. I'm just going to make a few comments before I pass it over to my colleague Mick. Firstly, I'll take your advice not to build a house over 3,000 square foot. I suppose the big take-home thing here that everybody has said, inconsistency. The inconsistency from the banks, infrastructure, planning, and as you even said your last thing, the septic tank grants. Inconsistency is the one thing that's driving us all out of rural Ireland, where we want to have a home, and I will keep driving home the word home. I'm just going to say 2 things. I know of 2 people, brother and sister, both applied for planning permission the exact same time on the family farm. The brother is farming on the farm, the sister isn't. Identical houses, because the sister wanted to just piggy bank and get it done a bit cheaper. The brother got his planning, the sister was refused because the planner said it didn't fit with the landscape, even though both houses are 300 metres apart in the same field. So that is just simply baffling. I've spoken to a lot of people over the past couple of weeks in regards to have moved abroad to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and it was about housing. 34 of them moved abroad out of 50 because they couldn't get planning permission, because they couldn't see a future. They couldn't renovate an old farmhouse. This is like barriers that are just been put up. It's just red tape, red tape, red tape. We need aid. And I'll just finish up on this point before I pass over. You said about objections. €20 is the objection fee. Come on, these serial objectors. €100, 5 objections. Sure, you could put that aside in a week, and I know there is, people are finding it financially tough, but like, the fee needs to be raised. People that are putting in planning permission are spending thousands for somebody to spend €20 to stall the ball. How is that right? And how isn't something being done about it? Is simply baffling. I'm going to pass you over to Mick. I'm going to leave it on that point.
Before you get cranky.
Yeah, before you
Yeah,
get
that
more.
does happen. Thank you, Deputy. I suppose we keep talking about homes, and I was just Googling something there. Apparently there's 60,000 holiday homes in Ireland, but that's according to Google, so how true it is, I don't know. We were lucky enough last weekend with our AGM down in Bantry, the lovely Beara Peninsula, and we found out down there is 40% of the houses in the Beara Peninsula are holiday homes. I'm lucky. I come from close enough to where Deputy Healy-Rae comes from. I come from the Oireachtas Peninsula. We've about 50% of the homes there are holiday homes. And Alice, you said people stay there for 3 months a year. Jesus, they like them. For us, 6 to 7 weeks of the year. So what we have is we've approximately 60,000 houses out there that would, I won't say fix, but will go a hell of a long way to fixing the housing issues we have in this country right now. They're all houses that are in good condition, require absolutely nothing. And yet, for the princely sum of, I think it's €200 a year, for the non-principal primary residence tax, you can keep that, whilst at the same time, we are seeing over 11,000 people homeless at the moment, and growing. So, I think maybe you have to get a small bit real, and just start tackling this, and not start talking about tax incentives, such as the Senator was talking earlier about CGT taxes. So let's go the other way. Why don't we fund a social housing building programme on the back of holiday homes that actually exist right now? It's not politically palatable, I know that, but we just want homes for our members. We want to stop, they're not my friends, they're gone years ago. We want to stop Niamh's, Elaine's friends, and in fact Niamh's and Elaine's of our country, smart, intelligent, educated people who are contributing. And they're just going because there's no future. So I suppose where we're coming at it from is we want a future. And being honest, there are no sacred cows when it comes to a future for our young people. Thank you.